Now open Mary, Our Lady of Peace Mausoleum in Flushing, New York. Secure your family's future with 10% down, no taxes, and 0% interest financing for up to 10 years on pre-need crypts and cremation niches starting at just $25 per month. Protect your loved ones with the gift of pre-planning. Visit them today at Mount St. Mary Cemetery. Call 718-353-1560. That's 718-353-1560 or go to ccbklyn.org to learn more. That's ccbklyn.org.
Welcome to the 5 o'clock show. It's time for Common Sense. Now, it's Katz and Cosby with John Katzimatidis and Rita Cosby, standing for truth, justice, and the American way, bringing common sense to the world. Now, here's John Katzimatidis and Rita Cosby. Breaking news, WABC.
And huge news coming down from the Middle East here on Katz and Cosby. Israel says that it struck Hezbollah's central headquarters in Beirut, and it was a direct strike trying to take out Hassan Nasrallah, who is the leader of Hezbollah. It is unclear at this hour if the successful strike was a success on taking out the leader of Hezbollah. We know that a number of people were killed and a number of commandos that were there at the location were taken out. But if the leader of Hezbollah was taken out by Israel in Lebanon, that is an enormous deal. And Hezbollah saying that it is gearing up and will strike back with all its might against Israel. Are we really on the brink of a much wider war in the world? So much to talk about here. And in studio today on Katz and Cosby, we have Ed Cox, of course, New York State GOP chair, and also Governor David Paterson, former New York State Democratic chair. Guys, this is an enormous day. There's so much breaking. First, your reaction, Ed.
Message to the Ayatollahs. We will take you out too.
Wow. So that's
because you are the head of the snake.
That you think is next.
That's what they're saying to them.
That's a big deal. Governor Paterson.
Well, I certainly hope that our government will back the Israelis with this type of a move, because otherwise it would just add to the confusion and in many respects give some kind of credence to the responses of Hezbollah and Hamas.
Yeah, let's hope. And let's see where it goes. Iran, by the way, today, finally, we heard from the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, who said they are indicting three Iranians for hacking into the Trump campaign. The only problem is, guys, guess where they're located? They're located in Iran.
Exactly.
Right. I mean, come on. After all these things we're talking about,
well,
they're like there's some big bad Annie Oakleys out there, and they're going after three hackers in Iran.
Can't they send an Uber over there to pick them up?
They'll try. I mean, the fact that they're actually saying this, you guys, as we're talking about, you're even laughing, Governor Paterson. It is incredible. I mean, they are dealing with enormous threats against President Trump. We have would-be assassins from Iran. We arrested the guy across the border, the Pakistani. They say there are enormous threats against this former president and others by Iran. And the best this AG can do is, go after three hackers at Cox.
Yeah, this is serious. There are already 2 attempts. We don't know what's behind those attempts necessarily. They're still looking at this. The FBI still can't open the phones of the person who took out the President Trump's ear.
Yeah, good point. By the way, later on in the show, we have Congressman Mike Waltz. We're going to talk with him because he's been right in the thick of all of that. The other big story is President Trump saying, I told you a year ago Eric Adams would be indicted, that they were going to go after him for speaking out against the migrant crisis.
Trump did say that. He had it right. He nailed it perfectly. Look, it was political from the start. As he was about to go down to complain about the illegal immigrants and what they were costing the city, and the White House wasn't doing anything about it, guess what? The FBI comes and takes his phones away. And in that whole process, he doesn't get down to Washington. Isn't that a coincidence?
Yeah, it is. The timing.
But I would say that I get the feeling that they have been at least watching, if not investigating Adams, maybe even going back before he became mayor.
Yeah, it looks like it, by the way. They said that it went back to 2017. And Gov Patterson, you have some big news of someone else's phone that was taken today.
Well, Ingrid Lewis Martin, who is the special advisor to the mayor, basically his number one person, also served as his deputy borough president when he was the borough president of Brooklyn, was accosted at the airport today by the FBI, who took her phones and some other, I don't know if she has any documents on her, but they stopped her coming into the country after a week vacation in Japan.
Wow, that's a biggie. And you know, it reminds me, you guys, first of all, she's very close, of course, to the mayor, but it reminds me the other day when the indictment came down from the U.S. attorney and he put out the 800 number and said, if anybody has any information. So it's like if you sneeze near the mayor, it sounds like they're going to grab your phone, you know?
It reminded me of those commercials you see late at night. They play them louder so you get stunned when you're watching a program. Call 800-CRIME. Get the mayor. Call 800-CRIME right now.
That's what it sounded like.
It is such a
good one, Gov.
It's such a wide dragnet. You wonder how strong the case really is once the evidence gets produced. They need more evidence.
Right. Well,
let's take everyone's phone as much as we can collect.
Yeah, Ed, and certainly when he spent so much time on these upgrades and they got to stay in fancy rooms, it really, to me, detracted from the strong evidence they appear to have about the 8-to-1 donations and how they got in the country, and then produced $10 million.
Yeah.
Now that's a real accusation.
I agree. It was sort of watered down because they kept talking about the upgrades and all the other stuff. Well, joining us now to talk about all of this enormous news today is Professor Alan Dershowitz, the great legal scholar. Professor Dershowitz, first let's get to the Eric Adams, and we have so much on Israel we want to get to, but Eric Adams was arraigned. He was in court and he said, I am not guilty. What do you make of where the case is now and the dragnet, the 800 number we were just talking about, that they're soliciting everybody and their brother to come forward?
And some will come forward, and people will make deals, and some people will sing, and others might compose to, get benefits from the government. Look, this is a case where the factual evidence of him doing things that he shouldn't have done is very great. Whether it qualifies under the very, very narrow federal statutes that govern political corruption is a difficult question. The Supreme Court and other courts have scaled back the scope of federal corruption, particularly corruption cases. They've reversed a number of convictions involving some very prominent people, many of whom did things that require us not to vote for them. But there's a big difference between misconduct and criminal conduct. And I think this is going to be a very hard case for the government to prove based on the indictment that I've read and what I've seen so far. But I don't have a lot of time, so I really want to turn to Israel.
Yeah, please. This is huge news.
Prime Minister Netanyahu. I was with him, and I was with his national security advisor, Ron Dermer, a good friend, when they began to get the news of the attack and whether or not the attack had managed to kill Nasrallah. And, of course, we all asked Bibi, well, did you get him or not? And he was like a sphinx. I mean, he wouldn't answer. He basically made a hand motion that suggested, patience, take your time. We're going to look at this very carefully. And then I heard from another source, well, the Israelis are using all their intelligence to investigate, to see whether they can confirm. But at the moment, they can't confirm. What they can confirm is there was, they believe, a very high likelihood that he was in the building at the time the attack occurred, and that it would be very difficult to survive the kind of attack if he was in the building. That's a little short of complete certainty, but it certainly sounds like good news for every American who should be thrilled at the death of the man who killed 240 of our Marines. Anybody who supports Israel who should be thrilled at the death of somebody who swore the destruction of Israel. And every decent person in the world should be thrilled that this guy was killed. It would be the best thing. It would be better than Osama bin Laden. Let me tell you why. Osama bin Laden, when he was killed, was a has-been. He wasn't doing anything. He was just hiding. It was important to get him because of what he had done. But Nasrallah is in the middle of killing people. And so if he's killed, it will save lives. It will save many, many, many lives. And it would be a great blessing for the world. I hope it's true.
Yeah, Professor Alan Dershowitz, I'll tell you, when I cheered when I heard this news. I was so happy. You know how strongly I feel about Israel.
Bad news. Let me tell you some bad news. So I'm at the event at the UN, and half the countries walk out, and people boo and they hate Netanyahu. You would think that the United States ambassador to the United Nations would make it a point to show up to show support for Netanyahu. She wasn't there. I don't know whether she was at a sorority party with Kamala Harris, but she wasn't there. It was disgraceful. I saw the three gray suits, low-ranking people at the United Nations sitting there in the seats reserved for the American diplomats at the UN. The head should have been there, and I want to know why she wasn't there. Was this deliberate? Was this Kamala Harris having a sorority party instead of listening to Netanyahu make his speech in front of Congress? Or was this, maybe a health issue? Or I'm not making an accusation. I'm just saying it's a question, and I want to know the answer. If this administration made a deliberate decision not to send their chief ambassador to the UN to listen to Benjamin Netanyahu, it's absolutely disgraceful. And I think we need to know the answer to that question.
Yeah, I agree. That is disgraceful. By the way, kudos to Netanyahu, who you were with today, Professor Dershowitz, for saying to also the UN, you are basically anti-Semitic bile, essentially. I mean, he really pointed the finger and said, you're not a UN. You have become so politicized and so weakened.
It was so clear from what we heard. We heard the president of Slovenia. Slovenia, you'd think they worry about their own problems, putting all the blame on Israel. Then, of course, Pakistan. Oh, my God. Israel are terrorists. Am I not mistaken that Pakistan hid Osama bin Laden for all the years when they finally got him? It was in Pakistan. These hypocritical countries they have one thing in common. They all hate Israel. And I just never want to see the United States join that. And the United States should have gone out of its way not only to have Mrs. Greenfield, the permanent representative to the UN there, but in a very visible way to make it clear. She should have stood up and applauded, as I did, and as many other people who came to support Bibi Netanyahu did. So I spent some good quality time with him and with his wife. They're old friends. I've known Bibi since the early 1970s, so how old we both are. And I've been to every one of his speeches at the UN. This was one of the very best.
Absolutely. One of the most important, I think, too. Ed Cox.
So, Professor, analyze for us, after all, this is all about Iran in the end.
Sure.
What does all this mean with respect to Iran and Israel and where they are at this point and where it might go?
Well, I think that Israel has sent a message to Iran. It was stated very clearly in the speech today at the UN, if you do what you did in April, if you attack us, we're going to come and destroy your nuclear program. We're going to come and we're going to attack you. And that's the best thing they could do would be to destroy the nuclear program. And so I think Israel has sent a very powerful message to Iran. Don't. But I think the difference between Israel and Biden is when Biden says don't, he doesn't back it up. And when Israel says don't, they do back it up. So I'm hoping is that Iran will be deterred. But if they're not, Israel should have every justification for going in and setting back their nuclear program by at least a decade.
Yeah. Absolutely. Great points. Professor Alan Dershowitz, thank you on such a busy day where you were there with the Prime Minister. We love you, and let's pray that we get that confirmation on Nasrallah. Thank you.
That would be a blessing.
It sure would be for the world. Thank you, Professor. And now let's go to Victoria Coates, former Deputy National Security Advisor under President Trump. Victoria, what a huge news day. We just had Professor Dershowitz on. He was with, as you heard, with Netanyahu when the news came down. And the Israelis, they have not been able to confirm it yet, but he said it would be highly unlikely that the head of Hezbollah would have survived the strike that Israel took right to the command headquarters there in Beirut. Your reaction?
Oh, I agree strongly with Professor Dershowitz that this would be pretty easy for Hezbollah to disprove if he wasn't there for whatever reason. Hand the man a newspaper, snap a picture, and put it on the internet that it's false, and take all the wind out of Israel's sails. That's what they would have done had they actually had that option. But it looks like this is getting closer and closer to confirmation. And the thing is, though, Rita, it's not just Nasrallah. It's all of Hezbollah leadership were apparently in that bunker. And so after what they've been through in the last 3 weeks, it's hard to see them functioning. And the IDF came out today and said Hamas, their partner organization in the south, has been degraded to a kind of a guerrilla force. They can no longer function as a coordinated military. I would say Hezbollah is getting close to that status, too.
You know, Victoria, as we're hearing all of this, I'm thinking of the politics of it all, because we've got President Biden and Kamala Harris who have been talking out of both sides of their mouth. Really no leadership whatsoever, it seems like, on Israel. And yet, in this case, they're just saying we got to go it alone, essentially. And boy, is Israel going it alone. Do you feel they're also up against the clock, too, that they feel like they've got to hurry up and kind of do these moves? Politically, Biden seems MIA. Obviously, if Trump comes in, he will be a friend of Israel, a stalwart one. But it's who knows what Kamala Harris would bring if she were to get elected.
Oh, exactly. And what we heard from them this summer is they would much prefer to delay the action in the north. They would like some more time. They weren't given that. Apparently, Hezbollah was planning Operation Conquer Galilee at an October 7th type attack, which would have been around the anniversary of that horrible day. And they felt they had to move. And so they're doing what they can. Again, agreeing with Professor Dershowitz, it's so shameful. Our UN ambassador was not there today to show ironclad support with the prime minister. That's what we should be hearing out of them. That's what would actually deter the Iranians from an attack, is the belief that the United States is right there in the foxhole with Israel. So you're not just tangling with one, you're tangling with both. And instead we get complaints that they weren't told and sort of bleats that they weren't involved in any way. Please don't hurt us, kind of a thing. And it's just shameful. Yeah,
we sound like wimps. And you know what it reminded me, and he brought it up, that when he said that she wasn't there, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, you've got one of our most important allies, she's not there. It reminded me, obviously, of Kamala Harris with her sorority event, and she couldn't be there when he addressed Congress. I thought it was disgraceful. Governor Patterson.
Well, in a situation like that, and obviously Netanyahu's speech and the fact that it was today, basically the last day, was the culminating event. And if if our government had any problems with Netanyahu saying it, she's the one who's supposed to deliver that message, but she's not even there. So it was really just like hiding and pretending that it wasn't happening when it was.
It was, Governor, and it's like when they abstain on these votes in the UN. They're like, oh, we weren't really voting for it, but we weren't really voting against it. And, you know, I'm old enough to remember when President Reagan said, if Israel is forced to leave the United Nations, the United States is going to be following Israel right out the door. And, you know, that is how you send a message to that degraded body, which the Prime Minister rightly called the Flat Earth Society today, full of delusion and conspiracy theories. And that's how you do it. Not like this, not with doublespeak and, as Rita said, you know, kind of talking out of both sides of their mouth.
What do you think is the reason for the doublespeak?
Well, I think this becomes another political issue. It is becoming increasingly clear they cannot win Pennsylvania without a strong showing from the Jewish vote. They can't win in Michigan without a strong showing from the Arab American vote. And hey, they can't win the country without a strong showing from the youth vote. And those three things don't really get along right now in terms of this policy. So I think they're trying to please everyone, and they're winding up pleasing no one.
By the way, speaking of Pennsylvania, I want to ask you what you thought of the fact that, President Zelensky of Ukraine goes to Pennsylvania and taxpayer dollars shipped there, and you see Josh Shapiro, who was number 2 choice, should have been number 1 for Kamala Harris, but she picked Looney Tim Walz. But he's signing ammo. And there's a lot of people who are saying, the Speaker of the House is now saying this needs to be investigated, that it looked like a campaign event, more than a a world leader coming event at a time of war. What was your reaction? Should that be investigated?
And it was it was extraordinary that Johnson, who was a very even-keeled guy, asked that the ambassador resign.
Exactly. He asked for her to be recalled. And, you know, this was theater just at its most gross. They put him on, it was C-130 in its fatigues as if he was coming straight from the battlefield. He was coming from New York City. you guys can look out the window from the studio. You know, you don't need fatigues in a C-130 to move around New York, although maybe during months a week it's not a bad idea.
These days you kind of do, actually, Victoria. You've been here recently. You know how bad it is.
But in terms of this, you know, the ambassador, I mean, she's not a bad person. I know her a little bit, but she has allowed this to become so politicized. She organized this event. She's the one who directs all the army of lobbyists that Ukraine has running around Washington, lobbying Democrats. And I've told her straight point blank, you guys need to go talk to the Republicans as well, because you can't count on just partisan politics to carry the day. If you're serious about this, what she showed is she's not serious. She did a major disservice to President Zelensky, who apparently did a huge amount of backtracking with former President Trump to get that meeting today, as well he should. But that was a massive mistake for them, and I don't think Congress is going to forget it anytime soon.
Yeah, I don't think so either. Boy, the politics of it all. Victoria, let's pray that Israel did get Nasrallah, and let's pray that things don't get crazier in the Middle East, because, boy, things are a powder keg right now. Thank you so much, Victoria.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you. So great to have you here. And everybody, when we come back on Katz and Cosby, Larry Kudlow, the great economic expert, is going to fill us in on the very latest, some big economic news.
A common sense recap of the day's biggest stories. It's John Catsimatidis and Rita Cosby. Katz and Cosby on 77 WABC.
And we are back here on Katz and Cosby. John has the day off. He's on a secret assignment, a great assignment, which I'm sure he'll share with us all on Monday. And we now go to Larry Kudlow, the great economic expert, of course, host of the #1 show there on Fox Business and also on WABC Radio Saturdays, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. His ratings go beyond the Milky Way. They go to the stratosphere and beyond. Larry, great to have you here. And, you know, I was watching you earlier today. You had a great segment I was watching there on Fox News. You were talking about Trump and also honing the message about, he's for no taxes. She's for higher taxes, making that very clear, the economic message this election season.
Well, you know, it's just interesting because, Kamala gave her speech in Pittsburgh on Wednesday, and this will be her third economic plan in 2 months, okay? And it's just as bad as the other plans. And the Wall Street Journal editorial board called it Bidenomics 2.0. And it's the same thing about destroying capital investment and profits, and it's all about big government socialism. And, you know, this is... She said at one point, I am a capitalist. Well, she's not a capitalist. She's a big government socialist. And you're looking at record tax increases. You know, by the way, if you tax companies, whether it's a large company or a small company, and their profits go down, what are they going to do? They're going to lay off workers. They're going to cut wages. So why is this a good thing? Then they have massive entitlements. They have huge transfer payments. And the thing that's so troubling about that, not only just the cost of it all, but the money would go to people without any work requirements, or it would go to people who don't have any tax liabilities. They're called tax refunds. But the fact of the matter is, it's just a cash entitlement. And it still has, student loan cancellations, which is illegal according to the Supreme Court. The same $25,000 free money to home buyers, which will jack up prices, nationwide rent controls, and the right to work laws, by the way, and in general price controls. So she's not a capitalist, and this would be very bad for the economy, and she'd be taxing capital gains. Unrealized capital gains would destroy the stock market and would cascade throughout the economy. In other words, it was a very bad, very poor economic speech. It's like Bidenomics and then some, okay? And that is not, I think, I know it's unhealthy for the economy, and I think it's going to be very bad for her election.
You know, what did you make of her interview with Stephanie Ruhle of MSNBC, who's an economic gal? She does a lot of business reporting. And even Stephanie Ruhle, who's, you would obviously sympathetic host, sympathetic network, she was kind of like, yeah, I got some word salad. Like she even said that she didn't get answers to pretty basic economic questions, Larry Kudlow.
Yeah, well, Kamala has a habit of lying, and that's very important. And MSNBC Rule did call her on it. I mean, she said it's the same old lies that Biden told. I inherited the worst economy. That's simply not true. She inherited a tremendous V-shaped recovery from the pandemic, or we inherited inflation. That's not true. Inflation was less than 2%, 1.4%. We created 800,000 manufacturing jobs. That's completely untrue. Almost all those jobs were snapbacks from pandemics. Trump created nearly 500,000 manufacturing jobs. So it's sort of one lie after another. And I think if you lose MSNBC, you're in trouble. You're in deep trouble.
Ed Cox.
Yeah, Larry, shifting to something else. First quarter growth was 1.4%. Second quarter is 3%. Is this going to make a third quarter, the election quarter, something higher than that? Is it possible with the economy our size for the administration to actually have a good times kind of a growth just around the when the election's happening?
Well, you'll get a GDP report preliminary in late October, just before the election. It could be good. It could be decent. I think the Atlanta Fed GDP tracker was 2.5% or 2.8%, something like that. But the problem isn't GDP. The problem is affordability. That's always been the Achilles heel of the Biden economy. So prices have risen faster than wages over the past 3.5 years, quite a bit faster. So wages have actually gone down for working folks, weekly wages down minus about 2.5%. Under Trump, they rose by 9%. It's an affordability crisis. GDP is boosted in many ways by consumers who are benefiting from government spending programs and by government spending programs themselves. So I think that's the story. I actually haven't looked at the numbers, except that the Atlanta Fed is just short of 3%.
Wow, very interesting. Larry, we love you. We always love having you here on the show. And everybody tune in to the great Larry Kudlow with the Stratosphere, of course, and well beyond 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. on WABC Radio. Thanks so much, Larry. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Rita. Appreciate it.
Thank you, my friend. And now let's go to other big headlines of the day.
It's the top news of the day, sponsored by Goya. Here's Rita Cosby.
And everybody, as we were talking about here on the top of the show with the governor and also the chairman, New York City Mayor Eric Adams is pleading not guilty. I changed the name. It's his brother. Eric Adams is pleading not guilty. He said, I am not guilty. He proclaimed it at his arraignment on federal corruption charges. Adams arrived with his defense attorney on Friday morning at Manhattan, a federal court, where he turned himself in and was processed and also fingerprinted. And also Israel, as we've been talking about, conducted an airstrike on a residential area of southern Beirut today. There is word, of course, that they were targeting the head of Hezbollah. And as you just heard here with Professor Dershowitz, Israel believes that it would be very unlikely that the head of Hezbollah would have survived. No full confirmation yet, though. And Hurricane Helene has killed at least 20 people in southeastern U.S. The storm slammed Florida's Big Bend area as a monster Category 4 hurricane. And later on in the show, we'll be talking with Congressman Mike Waltz about that and a lot more. Also talking about the Eric Adams case. And coming up, we have Carrie Lake, some stunning numbers about the border.
You're commuting home with Katz and Cosby. Now here's John Catsimatidis and Rita Cosby on 77 WABC. Breaking news, WABC.
And numbers just coming in that confirm a lot of things that President Trump has been saying. He's saying, look, they're emptying out the jails, the prisons across the country, these other countries, and sending them to America. Well, these are some stunning details. ICE just releasing a little bit ago, get this, 425 400,000 non-citizens that are convicted criminals have entered our country during the Biden-Harris administration. 425,000. Among them, 13,000 have been convicted of murder in their home countries. These people have been released into the U.S. They are not in custody. And also 15,000 also that have been convicted of sex offenses in their country and released in the United States. Those are stunning numbers. And joining us now to talk about all of this is Kari Lake, of course, running for Senate there in the state of Arizona. We love Kari Lake. Kari, your reactions to this, as Kamala Harris, of course, is in Arizona at the border today for the second time in 3 years.
I'm furious. I think I speak for every Arizonan, and this is absolutely treasonous. It is an insult to the American citizen, to our country, and it's despicable that they've allowed this many people in that are criminals and dangerous. You know, you said it there, 14,000 convicted murderers, 16,000 convicted rapists, and 425,000 criminals that are roaming our streets right now. This is just unbelievable, and it didn't have to be this way. And my message to these people is don't get comfortable, because starting in January of 2025, pack your bags. We're sending you home. You cannot stay. We will not allow this kind of a crime against the people of our country. And Rita, we're paying for it. That's what adds insult to injury. We're paying to put these people up. Here in Arizona, our rent prices have soared because we have to now compete with all these people who've poured across. President Trump says 21 million. I tend to believe his numbers over the numbers coming from the Joe Biden, Kamala Harris administration. We're paying to put these people up in hotels and apartments. And my opponent, Ruben Gallego, who's a rubber stamp for Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, has voted with them 100% of the time, has voted to give these people asylum and the ability to vote in this upcoming election. It is absolutely despicable. It's a crime against the people of this country, and we're not going to let it stand. We're going to send these people back home so that we can save our homeland.
Ed Cox for Kari Lake.
You know, Kari, Donald Trump knows his history. You cannot forget Castro's Mariel boat lift, where he took all the criminals and unwanted people from Cuba and shipped them to the United States. And that is exactly what a lot of these countries are doing. It is not unprecedented. That's in the back of his mind. I have no doubt about it. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's even gone so far as to say, you know, it's diabolically brilliant. If you think about it, you think of the biggest drag on any country, and it is, you know, violent criminals. He said they were emptying insane asylums, and they're all coming here. And unbeknownst to so many Americans, just going on with their everyday life, like, Laken Riley, who goes out for a morning jog, this young woman who has her whole life ahead of her, a nursing student in Georgia. Little does she know the man she's going to encounter is a killer, a rapist, who's going to end up bludgeoning her to death. This is such a crime on the American people. I can't even express my anger enough without using profanity, and I don't want to use profanity, but there aren't words to describe how upset I was when I read those figures today. And since they're coming from the administration, it tells me they're probably even higher than that, because we really don't get straight numbers from them on pretty much anything. Look how they lied about jobs. They overestimated the number of jobs they created by just 818,000. They said they created all these jobs, and then they revised them months later and said, sweet, we kind of overestimated by closer to 1 million jobs that really weren't created. So this administration is dishonest. I think this is criminal what they've done at the border by tearing it open when President Trump had it locked down and secure. They came in on day one, hour one, minute one, and opened it up. And not only invited the world in, but when the world started pouring across our borders, that wasn't enough for Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and my opponent, Ruben Gallego. They then created an app to send more people over. And then they started flying people over so they wouldn't have to come across the border. It is just treasonous is the only word I can come up with for what they have done to this country.
You know, I am so angry too, Kari Lake, because when I see these numbers and you think about the damage, like you brought up, obviously, You brought up Laken Riley. I think of Joycelyn Nunguri in Texas. I mean, think about 14,000 people who have been convicted in their home countries of, you can imagine, probably the worst of the worst. They're in America. They're roaming free. Sex offenders. And like you said, 15,000. Imagine the damage that those individuals can do. And many of them gang members, as we know. We've seen these horrible numbers. We saw what happened in Aurora, Colorado. We know what's happening there in Arizona. This to me, I agree with you. It is really treasonous. It's shocking.
Well, and you know, it's not just crimes against adults, it's crimes against children as well. We've been seeing that over and over. And not a week goes by where I don't see a headline of a child sexually assaulted or hurt by somebody who's here illegally. And it's got to stop, and we have to vote. This is why this election is everything. We've heard it before, the most important election, and this is really, could be the last election. If we don't vote these people out of office, we won't have anything left of America. This isn't Democrat versus Republican. We're beyond that. This is Americanism versus communism. And they're trying to turn this country into a third world nation. They're trying to, you know, the people who are coming across, by the way, that we're putting up and giving housing, giving, these EBT cards, like food stamp cards, basically, are being, their cost of living is nothing to them. So therefore, they're willing to work for peanuts. And then the people, the hardworking American taxpayers who are footing the bill for it, they're watching as their wages remain stagnant or get driven down by the millions of people here willing to work for next to nothing. It's in so many ways, it's not just affecting our crime, it's affecting our economy as well. We're having to compete with people for housing now, which is driving the cost of housing up. And as I said, depressing our wages. And you know how bad it is in New York City. New York City doesn't even look like New York of yesteryear. It looks like, you have to watch your back. It's not safe to be on the subways. And the people being affected the most are middle class, working class folks, Hispanics, Black Americans are being hurt the most. They are being replaced by these people coming over. Their jobs they're being pushed out of their jobs and replaced by people who are willing to work for less.
Absolutely. And Carrie Lake, before we let you go, also, we were talking about this earlier in the week about this decision by, it was a judge, I believe, there in Arizona who decided, was it 98,000 people that were non-citizens are allowed to vote? How could this be?
Well, the truth of the matter is we don't really know what their status is. These are people who've been here. The truth is there's probably closer to 500 to maybe even 1 million. This is according to a lawsuit that's pending right now of people who are invalid on our voter rolls. So that could mean they're here illegally, they moved, they died, they don't live at that address anymore. And we're trying to get them to clean up the voter rolls. They came forward and said we located about 98,000. The worry was that many of these were people who could possibly be here legal. They have been voting for a long time, and most of them were Republican voters. And so without being able to do more investigation of it, just throwing them off the books because our election officials didn't do a good job of ascertaining if they're here legally, it is believed, according to our AZ GOP chair, that these people are here legally. They just kind of fell under this loophole that happened after 1996, before we started keeping records the way we do now. So I think it was with abundance of caution. The judge said we don't want to disenfranchise legal voters. But it just goes to show, Rita, that we have to do a better job. We've got to be cleaning out these voter rolls. People come and go in Arizona all the time, and the fact that there could be anywhere from 500,000 to 1.2 million invalid entries on our voter rolls is unconscionable, and it shows that our election officials just haven't been doing their job with cleaning the voting rolls.
Yeah, that's amazing. That is amazing. Well, keep us posted, Carrie, please.
I want to say one more thing about Kamala Harris. I hope that when she comes to the border wall later today, and by the way, she's planning to stop very late in the day. I think she wants this whole thing to just maybe hit maybe only the evening news. She wants to make it a small news cycle so she can say she went to the border, like touch her foot down and say, well, I was at the border. I hope she notices that in the areas where we have the big, beautiful Trump wall, people are not pouring across. It's only in the areas that are open where we had the materials to build that wall in Arizona, and she sold them for pennies on the dollar. We had $325 million in building material for that wall, and she gave it away. And now our state is overrun, our country is overrun with many criminals. Fentanyl is killing our young people, and the cartels are in control. You know, good job, Kamala. You really screwed things up, and that's why we're going to vote you out of office in November.
Yeah, powerful statement. I cannot believe what they have done to our open borders. It is really astounding on so many levels, so many levels. Carrie Lake, we love you. We wish you so much luck in your Senate race. You got to come on again soon. We love you.
Thank you. We need help. Head to carrielake.com. We're being outspent by my radical Marxist open borders opponent. So if you can spare $5, help us out. We got to get ads on and let people know how radical his plan is. It is an open borders, sanctuary city type of guy who wants to defund the police.
CarrieLake.com, everybody. Thank you, Carrie, so much. We appreciate it. Thank you. And joining us now is former federal prosecutor Doug Burns. Doug, we want to get to the other big news of the day. Eric Adams, of course, in court. He was arraigned today, and he said, I am not guilty. Where is this headed, Doug Burns? You're a former federal prosecutor. You also know Damian Williams, who is the guy prosecuting Eric Adams.
You know, an arraignment's, nothing all that dramatic, honestly, not to take the buzz out of it. But you go in, you waive a reading of the charge. This was 57 pages. So, of course, but even when it's 2 pages, you waive a reading, you enter a plea of not guilty, which is just a legal formality, by the way. People make that dramatic. He's saying he's not guilty. Not necessarily. It's just a legal plea. And then, of course, he was released in his own recognizance. He's not, I'm chuckling, he's not a flight risk. He's mayor of New York City.
Yeah, obviously. Now, listen, Doug, what are your thoughts about this politicization sort of angle? His defense is that, I complained about the migrants. I did, I spoke out against, and look, the timing, as we were talking about earlier, Ed, it is interesting. He's about to go fly in and meet with Biden, and suddenly on the plane, he gets told that his campaign, major staffer, has her home raided. It was the first of many. The timing is pretty interesting. And then he complains again, and then another one gets raided, and you've got even President Trump saying it looks a little political.
It does look political. He was a very open complainer about the Biden, border crisis machinations. There's good news and bad news in that. The good news is ostensibly he could try to raise that. The bad news is, A, selective prosecution is difficult, and then B, it begs the question on how strong the case itself is. On the case itself, I'm finding it fascinating to see the different responses, Professor Turley and others. I'm underwhelmed, obviously, by being upgraded to a first-class seat from a business seat. That is really low on the bribery continuum. But having said that, if in fact, and this is an open question, if in fact they can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he got $10 million in matching campaign funds that he wasn't entitled to, and he knew it, and that'll be a little bit of a tall order, all of those components I just laid out, got $10 million, knew he wasn't entitled to it, knew that there were straw donors, then that could turn into a fairly serious case. And then the other bad news for the mayor is they do have stuff in the indictment about, erasing stuff and messages. And, I've stood in courtrooms on both sides of court. Ladies and gentlemen, if you did nothing wrong, why are you erasing things? So there's a lot to it. I have to digest it a little bit more. But, on its face, it's a fairly serious case.
Doug, you handle the quid here. That is weak. That is upgrading, things like that. How about the quo? Is that strong at all? That did a thing with respect to the fire inspections before the president of Erdogan came to open the new building?
That's a very, very important question because your question tracks right into two law cases. One, the McDonnell case, where the former governor of Virginia was exonerated in the Supreme Court on these type of quid pro quo grounds. Then there was a recent case from the Supreme Court differentiating between gratuities and bribes. So there's some legal room. Now, to answer your question, again, really good one, they say that he rushed through the approval for the Turkish embassy, but at the same time, you're going to see arguments about, it's good for New York City, so on and so forth. It's going to be very fact-specific. In other words, were there really serious problems that the fire department raised and would not have approved the building on, and then they were pressured to go the other way? I mean, that's the classic example of how an indictment, is a lot of fanfare and so on, but we need to hear the real story, really getting into the nuts and bolts. And then they do cite some other stuff about, providing favors and assistance. But again, I don't think it's necessarily or automatically that overwhelming. We have to wait and see.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the big question. You hit on the point, Gov Patterson, too, about the 800 number. It was like real quick.
It was just kind of shocking right in the middle of this presentation that they asked for help for the public to finish it off. Yeah. And it reminded me of those TV commercials you see late at night where they're screaming at you to keep you awake or to come back from the bathroom or whatever you're doing when you're trying to watch a show. And I just thought it was a little, I wouldn't say unprofessional, but it just seemed gauche.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and you can read that two ways. I mean, if they're openly asking for help on the case, one could argue, then they need to fill in holes in the case. I mean, you can interpret it in all different ways.
Right.
The other editorial, obviously, is, was it really necessary to bring this now? How about waiting till after the election?
Well, that it begs the question. They want to do it now, clearly, and I think part of it is the timing of the U.S. attorney, because he's there only until serves at the pleasure of this administration.
And Doug, finally, did you read?
Yeah, real quick, we got to go.
You read the New York Post article where the Adams administration's lawyers wrote to try to quash the investigation in what really looked like something that was written by a student radical group.
Yeah, no, I did see that. I mean, yeah, I agree. There's a number of amateurish moves sort of going on all around now. Yep. But again, we'll wait and see.
All right, Doug Burns, we love you. Thank you. Former federal prosecutor, thank you very much. And everybody, when we come back, we're going to talk about now some new details into these attempted assassinations of President Trump. That and a lot more. We're going to be talking to hopefully Congressman Mike Waltz after the break.
It's a common sense recap of the big stories. It's Katz and Cosby on 77 WABC.
And we are back here on Katz and Cosby. Rita Cosby here. John Katz has the day off, doing other stuff. Also, Ed Cox and Governor Patterson. You know what? Let's go right to Congressman Mike Waltz. Before we get into all the latest, there's a lot of stuff to get into, of course, with all the threats to the homeland and Iran, these big developments. First, how is Florida doing? How is your home state doing, Congressman, with this horrible storm?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Rita. The Panhandle took a heck of a punch. The good news is it hit what we call the Big Bend, where the peninsula curves into the Panhandle, on the Gulf side is probably the least populated part of the state. The bad news is it's also one of the least affluent parts of the state's real blue collar rural area. And so, our National Guard, our state emergency services, the governor and his team, we've got this down pat. We'll recover.
Good. Thank goodness. Well, our thoughts and prayers are with everybody there and in the Southeast overall. I saw Georgia too. Wow. Big news today, Congressman, of course, with everything that's going on, with Hezbollah. You saw that we're waiting to see if there's confirmation of the leader of Hezbollah. Talk about that, especially how this affects President Trump, the threats by Iran, of course, which leads Hezbollah. This is a really dangerous time now.
It is. The Israelis clearly have crossed the line from trying to kind of degrade Hezbollah to reduce some of their capabilities to go on offense. They're going for the kill, Rita. This rollout by many administrations, U.S. administrations, Israeli administrations, was kind of a quasi-political and military figure. He's quasi-integrated into the Lebanese government and was considered somewhat off limits, that it was really crossing a line. But you know what? If Hezbollah can repeatedly, daily, launch rockets indiscriminately into Israeli cities, kill Israeli children, this was a targeted strike. I think it's perfectly proportional on the Israelis' parts. And you know what? what I have to say to all of our veterans and our Marines out there is Semper Fi. We don't have to go too far back in time to know and remember the 1983 Beirut bombing that Hezbollah was behind, the kidnapping of Americans, the torture of a CIA station chief, William Buckley. So a lot of people say never forget. Well, you know what? The Israelis truly never forget. And I hope Nasrallah has been taken off the battlefield, and that takes kind of the sword of Damocles or the gun to Israel's head out of Iran's hand, so to speak, in the short term. In the long term, we still have to go back to maximum pressure on Iran, or they're simply going to keep pumping cash into Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and help them reconstitute.
Congressman Michael Waltz, Ed Cox.
Yeah, Congressman, you know your military history well. It's a little bit, almost 20 years ago that Israel invaded southern Lebanon, and it didn't really quite work out the way they thought it would. Now, with their battle Hezbollah are battle hardened. They fought in Syria. They have 150,000 really powerful missiles. How do you think this turns out in the end?
Well, it's pretty incredible. I think the Israelis learned a lot of lessons from 2006. They have a huge technology sector there in Tel Aviv. And in ways, frankly, that our own Pentagon is struggling to do, it seems that they really integrated those lessons learned, integrated those technologies, had I think, a historically bold covert action with the pager and walkie-talkie operation.
Wow.
Bottom line is they've done more damage to Hezbollah without putting an Israeli boot on the ground than they certainly did in 2006 and possibly ever. So the question is, do they still feel like they need to go into southern Lebanon? Because the outstanding issue is the demilitarized zone in southern Lebanon that Hezbollah has violated. The UN has not enforced, shouldn't surprise anyone, that are still holding tens of thousands of Israelis at risk. And just to put that in perspective, 90,000 displaced Israelis would be several million displaced Americans that can't go back to their homes. Imagine if we had 2 to 3 million Americans pushed off our own southern border that had rockets and missiles firing at them on a daily basis. We wouldn't tolerate it. The Israeli government shouldn't tolerate it either. And rather than chastising them, as Biden and Harris are doing, we should be thanking them. Because if not for Israel, they would be coming after us.
Yeah, you're right. By the way, it seems like Israel, with all these attacks and strikes of late, they've done more damage, you think about, to some of these enormous terrorist operations between Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, all of them in the last few weeks than I feel like this administration has done in years. I mean, it's been extraordinary. Congressman, thank you so much.
And very quickly, they didn't tell us about these operations. The Israelis didn't tell us because they knew Biden's people would try to talk them out of it. And I think that's an incredibly sad statement for the state of our alliance.
Yeah, that sure is. And it speaks volumes of this administration and just weak leadership, and the message that it sends to the world. But bravo that Israel is taking matters into its own hands. Congressman, thank you so much. We love having you here, and we are praying for Florida too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wow, what a show, you guys. What a news-breaking show. My goodness. Governor Patterson, Ed Cox, what do we all stand for, guys?
Truth, justice, and the American way.
And again, pray for Florida and everybody in the path of that storm.